I'm the kind of person who labels storage bins and keeps extra dry erase markers in my trunk. So when I bought my first house at 29, I didn't want character. I wanted predictable. It was a small place on the edge of Tulsa. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a tidy yard, with a tree that leaned slightly like it had survived a few storms. The street was quiet. Neighbors had wind chimes and porch lights that came on at dusk. The first night I slept there, I remember thinking, this is what safety feels like. I measured everything the first weekend, mapped out furniture placement, planned upgrades, paint, new fixtures, better insulation before winter. Then I noticed the closet in the main bedroom. It was deeper than it should have been. It wasn't impressively spacious, but it was oddly deep. The back of it disappeared into darkness even in daylight. The closet swallowed light. I hung my clothes, lined up my shoes, put cedar blocks on the shelf. For a few weeks, everything felt normal. Then one night, I smelled cigarette smoke. It was faint, more like the memory of smoke. It brushed past me while I was already in bed and disappeared almost as quickly. I don't smoke. None of my close friends smoke. I told myself the previous owner probably had. Houses hold smells. That's what people say. It didn't happen again for several nights. I forgot about it. Fall teaching is exhausting. By the time I got home, all I wanted was quiet. Shower, leftovers, a show playing softly while I graded papers. The smoke came back about a week later, closer to midnight. This time it felt closer to the closet. I got up, slid the door open, leaned in and sniffed like an idiot. Nothing but stale air. I bought charcoal odor absorbers the next day, plug-in fresheners. I vacuumed and wiped the baseboards. For a while I thought I'd fixed it, but over the next couple months, the smell returned on certain nights. Not every night, but always late, always after I was already in bed. The closet itself started feeling wrong, warmer than the rest of the room sometimes, stale even after cleaning. And the sliding door didn't close flush unless I pushed it harder than it should need. I blamed the track. Houses settle. Still, I began double-checking it before bed. I'd slide it shut, press until I felt resistance, then stand there listening to the house breathe. Ducts ticking, refrigerator humming, distant traffic. I wasn't terrified, but I was always alert, and that's exhausting. One night around 2 a.m, I got up to use the bathroom. On my way back, the smell was so clear it made my eyes sting, like someone had just put out a cigarette nearby. I stood in the doorway, hand on the light switch, and listened. Nothing. I didn't turn the light on. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to confirm anything. I went back to bed and pulled the comforter up higher than usual. In January, my energy bill jumped. It could have been normal winter usage, but I'm not great at ignoring inconsistencies. So I called a contractor to check insulation in the bedroom. He was polite, practical. He stepped into the closet and knocked on the back wall. The first tap sounded solid. Then he moved his hand slightly and the sound changed. Hollow in a way that didn't match the rest of the wall. He tapped again. "This sounds hollow in the wrong way," he said. I felt that twist in my stomach. He ran his fingers along the drywall and found the edge of a panel I had never noticed. It wasn't a typical access hatch. The edges were too clean, like it had been designed to disappear unless you knew where to look. He popped it open. The air that came out was stale and heavy. Behind the closet wall was a narrow void between studs, deeper than the space should have allowed. It was big enough for someone to crouch. At first, I didn't see much. Then my eyes adjusted. Crushed water bottles, a dusty blanket pushed toward the back, and a white slip of paper that caught the light. The contractor reached in and pulled it out. Fast food receipt, 2 weeks old. The date was bold at the top. 2 weeks meant while I had been living there, while I was sleeping in that room. There were no broken windows, no damaged locks. Everything looked normal, which made it even worse. I called the police. Saying the words out loud felt surreal. There's a hidden space in my wall. 2 officers came. They were polite, but the questions felt misplaced. Any exes? Any issues at work? Are you sure that receipt isn't yours? I stood in my own bedroom explaining that I don't eat fast food in my closet. They took photos, bagged the receipt and 1 bottle, suggested changing the locks. They couldn't find obvious forced entry, so there wasn't much they could promise. After they left, I sat on my bed and stared at the open panel. The space was positioned so that someone crouching inside would be just a few feet from where I slept. Close enough to hear my breathing, close enough to know when my alarm went off. I moved to the living room that night, dragged my pillows and blanket out like I was camping, left the lights on, locked and relocked the front door. For weeks, I didn't sleep in that bedroom. The panel was sealed, the locks changed, but something had changed. I started noticing every gap in the house. The attic access, the crawlspace vent, the small spaces I'd never considered before. The smoke never came back after the panel was discovered. In the spring, I put the house back on the market and told everyone it was for job reasons. I staged it carefully, let strangers walk through and comment on how cozy it felt. I nodded and smiled. On the day I handed over the keys, I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired. I didn't buy a haunted house. I bought a hiding place. I'm a paramedic in Aurora, and I bought the duplex for practical reasons. It made sense. Decent neighborhood, investment potential. It wasn't charming. It was functional. That was the appeal. When I moved in, I set everything up the way I like it. Boots by the door, gym bag on the hook, bed against the shared wall in the main bedroom because that's where it fit best. I didn't think twice about the wall I was sleeping against. The tapping started about 3 weeks later. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a light knock, always late, and always when the house had settled into that deep quiet where every small sound feels amplified. The first time I blamed pipes, old building noises. Temperature changes make drywall pop. I've lived in enough places to know houses make noise, but it kept happening, usually after midnight, sometimes closer to 2 or 3. A few taps, silence, then a few more like someone testing if there would be an answer. Sometimes I work nights, and my sleep schedule is unpredictable, so I assumed exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then the whispering started. No conversation I could make out, just the sound of someone speaking softly right on the other side. You couldn't make anything out, but you could tell it was human because it had pauses where a reply should be. The first time I heard it, I sat upright in bed. It stopped immediately. I leaned my ear against the wall, which in hindsight feels stupid, but you do strange things when you're trying to convince yourself something is harmless. After that, every sound felt responsive. If I shifted in bed, the tapping stopped. If I stood up, the whispering cut off. I thought I was overtired. I've seen enough bad calls to know your brain can amplify things when you're running low on sleep. I bought a fan to drown it out. Then earplugs. Both helped, but sometimes I'd still wake up sensing movement through the wall, even if I couldn't hear it clearly. Eventually, I knocked on my neighbor's door. He looked normal, mid-30s, polite enough. I kept it casual. Hey, I've been hearing tapping through the shared wall at night. Just wanted to check if something's going on. He blinked, then smiled like I'd told a harmless joke. Nah, he said. Probably the building. Completely dismissive. I let it go because what was I going to accuse him of? Talking near drywall? One night after a long shift, the tapping was louder. Then that whispering again. I called non-emergency. 2 officers came by, knocked next door, spoke to him, and he denied everything. The cops shrugged politely. No evidence, no crime. For a few days, it stopped. That's when I started noticing timing. The tapping happened after I'd been in bed for a while. The whispering stopped when I moved. It felt reactive. Spring came and I had a leak along the baseboard on the shared wall. Minor, but enough to require cutting into drywall. I hired a contractor because I didn't want to deal with it between shifts. When he opened the wall, he paused. "You got kids?" he asked. "No." He stepped aside so I could see. There was a small hole drilled clean through toward the other unit, about the size of a dime. At first, my brain tried to rationalize it. Wiring, old repair, pest inspection. But the placement didn't make sense for any of that. I crouched and looked through it. Dark on the other side. I stood up and traced the line of sight. The hole aligned perfectly with where my head rested on my pillow. My bed. My side. A direct line. I felt weird. I felt a kind of cold clarity. I called the police again. Different officers this time. I showed them the hole, showed them the alignment. They took it seriously, and the language changed quickly to intent. A hole could be anything. A hole could be old. A hole could be accidental. They went next door and checked behind a framed picture on the shared wall. Behind it was the other end of the hole. Clean and hidden. The neighbor claimed he'd hung the frame and didn't know about the hole. He delivered that line too smoothly. The same polite smile, like we were discussing a parking issue, not a drilled line into my bedroom. The officers couldn't arrest him based on that alone. They just filed a report, suggested documentation, and suggested I call again if anything escalated. It already had. It just wasn't dramatic enough to fit a headline. That night, I didn't sleep in that bedroom. I patched the hole, installed a camera in the hallway, rearranged the bed so my head wasn't against any shared wall, but none of it fixed the feeling. I confronted him in the driveway the next day. "If you've got an explanation, now's the time," I said. He laughed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." A week later, he was gone. No goodbye. No moving truck, I noticed. Just a vacant unit and a landlord claiming it had been planned. Maybe it had. Maybe it hadn't. I've walked into shootings, overdoses, domestic violence scenes. I've seen what chaos looks like when it's loud. The problem this time is that it wasn't loud. It was quiet, and it lived inside a wall I trusted. I don't sleep with my head against a shared wall anymore. I've worked emergencies my whole adult life. I didn't expect the most disturbing thing to be a dime-sized hole pointed at my bed. That was 2020, middle of the chaos. Buying that modest place felt like the first stable decision I'd made in months. 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, tiny yard with an overgrown lilac bush. Nothing special, but it was mine, and for me it was really special. I'm a high school teacher. I don't default to paranoia. If something seems off, my instinct is to search for the normal explanation first. That instinct almost cost me. It started small. So small I didn't even label it as suspicious. I'd come home and notice the pantry door slightly ajar when I was sure I'd shut it. A cereal box turned a different direction. The peanut butter jar moved from the front of the shelf to the back. Nothing stolen, but a framed photo in the hallway would be tilted a few degrees. A kitchen chair pulled out just a bit farther than I remembered. All things that could have been me. Teaching during 2020 meant constant mental whiplash. Hybrid classes, tech issues, kids in quarantine. My brain felt overused and under-rested. It was easy to believe I'd just forgotten. Then one morning, I drove halfway down my street before something nagged at me. I turned around, went back, and checked the front door. The deadbolt wasn't thrown. I always locked it. I had built the habit because of a stupid handle trick on the front door. Lift, turn, double check. Every time. I stood there staring at the lock, telling myself I must have rushed. I had been running late, but it stuck with me. After that, I started doing something that felt ridiculous. I took photos of my house before leaving for work. Not every inch, just quick snapshots. Pantry shelves, living room, the front door with the deadbolt secured. It felt dramatic, like I was building a case against my own forgetfulness. I'd check them at the end of the day and see the differences. The chips moved. The photo frame straightened when I'd left it crooked. The blanket folded differently. Nothing big, but consistent. The kind of consistent that doesn't happen by accident. Still, I kept trying to rationalize it. Stress, fatigue, overthinking. I bought a simple door sensor alarm. Nothing fancy, just something that would chirp if the door opened. For a few weeks, everything seemed quiet. The house settled back into routine. Then I came home early one Thursday. A class was canceled last minute, and instead of staying at school grading essays, I decided to work from home. It was mid-afternoon, broad daylight. When I pulled into my driveway, nothing looked off. There were no strange vehicles. No open windows, just my quiet little street. I unlocked the front door, lifting the handle like always, and stepped inside. The air smelled normal, coffee and laundry detergent. For a second, I almost laughed at myself. You've been building ghosts out of nothing. Then I heard it, the sound of a key turning. The front door. I turned as the knob moved. The deadbolt clicked and the door swung inward. A man stepped inside like he was returning from checking the mail. Late 40s, maybe. Work boots, hoodie, baseball cap. No hesitation in his movement. He saw me and paused like he was irritated. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice came out calm, controlled, like I was correcting a student. He blinked once and said, "I forgot something from years ago." "This is my house," I said. "I used to live here. That doesn't mean you can walk in." "How did you get in?" I asked. I still had a key. That was the moment everything lined up. The pantry, the pictures, the deadbolt. No signs of a break-in, no broken glass, just access. I stepped back, keeping distance between us. "Get out." He didn't argue, didn't apologize. He simply backed out through the door and walked down the steps like I'd inconvenienced him by being home. I locked the door and called the police. They arrived, took notes, asked what he looked like, asked if anything was missing. I explained the subtle changes I'd documented, showed them the photos. One of the officers asked a question that stopped me cold. "Did you rekey the locks when you moved in?" I hadn't. I assumed it had been done. Assumed it was standard. The next day, a locksmith confirmed the lock was builder grade and likely unchanged since installation. No break-in had ever occurred. My house had simply remained accessible. After that, I replaced every lock, installed cameras, motion lights, a reinforced strike plate. I turned my modest little house into something closer to a checkpoint. But the psychological shift had already happened. Before, the house felt like mine. After, it felt borrowed. I stayed another year. I triple-checked locks every night. The door sensor chirp became both comfort and reminder. Sometimes I'd lie awake and replay the way he'd stepped inside, just entering. He behaved like I was the one trespassing. The scariest thing wasn't a burglar. It was someone walking into my house like I was the temporary guest. The first thing I liked about the house in Indianapolis was how quiet it was. No upstairs neighbors, no hallway footsteps. At night, you could hear the refrigerator click on and the HVAC cycle. And that was it. After years of apartments and business travel, that kind of silence felt earned. We moved in early 2020. 2 kids and a dog. One detail I noticed right away: the attic access was in the hallway ceiling between the bedrooms, with a pull-down ladder. The attic vent faced the side yard, the part of the property you barely see unless you're taking trash out at night. I liked that it wasn't visible from the street. It felt tucked away. For a while, the house delivered exactly what it promised. Then one night, long after everyone was asleep, I heard footsteps. Above us. Footsteps, like someone walking. I sat up in bed and listened. My wife slept through it. The kids didn't stir. The dog didn't bark, which honestly unsettled me more than the noise. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. Clean stop. There was no exit sound, just silence. The next morning, I did what everyone does now. I Googled it. Every forum said the same thing. Animals, raccoons, squirrels, totally normal. So I told myself it was animals. It didn't happen every night. That helped. Once a week, sometimes 2 weeks of nothing, then back again. But it was always late, after the house had gone completely still. If the TV was on downstairs, nothing. If the dishwasher was running, nothing. If someone was up moving around, nothing. But on nights when everything was quiet, that's when it would start. I pulled the attic ladder down one Saturday afternoon and went up with a flashlight. I expected droppings, torn insulation, something obvious, but I found nothing. The insulation was fluffy and undisturbed. The attic smelled like dry wood and old air. I stayed up there longer than I needed to, trying to make the noise make sense. I came down feeling foolish for even checking. but the walking kept happening, sometimes directly above our bedroom, sometimes over the hallway, once over the kids' rooms. That night, I lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling. I started doing little things. I put a thin strip of painter's tape across the attic hatch seam, just a tell. If it opened, the tape would tear. The tape never tore, which should have made me feel better. Weeks later, I was folding laundry in the hallway and looked up at the hatch. It looked normal, but there was a faint gray smudge on the ceiling near the frame, like someone had brushed it with a sleeve. I pulled the ladder down again. This time, the insulation wasn't pristine. There were compressed paths, not scattered dents like an animal darting around. A route, a repeated line pressed down across the joists like someone had walked the same way enough times to flatten it. I moved the flashlight slowly, following the indentation. It led toward the side yard vent. Behind a ridge of insulation, tucked almost carefully, was a rolled sleeping bag. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, waiting for my brain to turn it into something else. Old contractor debris, insulation wrap, anything but what it looked like. It was a sleeping bag. Near it were cigarette butts, and they looked recent. We don't smoke. No one we know had any reason to be up there. I climbed down, shut the hatch, and told my wife. I watched her face go from confused to tight and guarded. We got the kids out of the house and called the police. 2 officers came. They went up with flashlights while I stood in the hallway listening to their boots move above us, and that sound did something to me. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt shared. They came down with the sleeping bag in an evidence bag and the cigarette butts collected in a glove. They asked practical questions. How long have you heard noises? Any contractors recently? Exterior cameras? Any access points? I showed them the attic vent. One officer shined his light up and pointed out that the screen was loose at one corner, like someone knew how to remove it without making it obvious. They didn't find anyone. The officer said something careful about how whoever it was might have moved on once they realized we'd noticed. After that, I did everything you're supposed to do. Reinforced the vent with hardware cloth and screws, installed cameras covering every angle of the yard, added motion lights, put locks on the attic hatch. I even hired a contractor to walk the exterior and point out potential vulnerabilities. He talked about soffits and roof lines like it was a standard improvement project. It all sounded normal, but the quiet never came back the same way. Because now when the house goes still at night, I don't just hear silence. I hear possibility. I catch myself noticing the same things I used to enjoy. The TV off, the dishwasher done, the kids asleep. And instead of feeling peaceful, I feel aware. The attic still exists above us. It's sealed, secured, reinforced. But I know now that there's a part of the house I don't live in. A layer above my daily life where someone once walked, paced, waited. I used to think I knew my home completely. Turns out I only knew the parts I occupied. I've always been the lock guy, not paranoid, just disciplined. I've spent 20 years on construction sites watching what happens when people get comfortable. My wife used to tease me that if I ever forgot my lunch, it'd be because I was double-checking a deadbolt. In 2019, we were living in Fresno, a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street, with dogs barking at mail trucks and sprinklers clicking on before sunrise. The bathroom window was small, high up, and frosted. You'd need a step stool to reach it. Most people would say no one's getting in through that. That's exactly why I paid attention to it. Bathrooms are routines, half-awake moments. I didn't like the idea of a window up there that wasn't locked tight. The first time I found it unlocked, I blamed myself. It was late. I'd showered, brushed my teeth, and was doing that end-of-day mirror stare when I noticed the latch sitting up. I remember thinking, you missed it. I pushed it down, felt it click, and went to bed. A couple nights later, it was up again. This time I was sure I'd locked it. I asked my wife, "Did you open the bathroom window?" "No. The kids, they can't even reach it." I still didn't panic. People forget things. Latches slip. I told myself it was cheap hardware. But then it started happening more consistently. I began checking it as part of my nightly routine. Doors, garage, side gate, and bathroom window. For about a week, nothing happened. Then, one morning, I walked in and it was unlocked again. The problem wasn't just that it was open. It was that I knew I'd locked it. I remember the feel of the latch under my thumb, that small resistance before it seated. Now it was up. My wife started getting irritated, not because she didn't believe me, but because I kept circling back to it. Did you maybe bump it? No. Are you sure? Yes. Are you? I could hear myself and I didn't like it. I'm not the jump to conclusions type. I don't get rattled easily. I see real emergencies at work. A window latch shouldn't shake me. So I decided to remove doubt entirely. I bought a secondary lock. Solid metal, with long screws. The kind I'd install on a rental I didn't want anyone messing with. I measured carefully, pre-drilled, drove the screws deep into the frame. When I was done, I tugged on the window hard. It didn't move. I remember feeling a quiet satisfaction. Problem solved. That night I checked it again before bed, locked and secure. In the morning, the air in the bathroom felt different, a little colder. The window was open about 4 inches, and the secondary lock was gone. It wasn't broken, it was gone. For a few seconds, I thought I was looking at it wrong. Then I saw the empty screw holes. The screws were sitting on the counter, all 4 of them, lined up. They hadn't ripped the lock off. They'd unscrewed it. Whoever removed it had the right tool and enough time to do it carefully. I called my wife in. She looked at the window, then at the screws, and her face changed. "That's not okay," she said quietly. The kids were at school. The house felt hollow. I called the non-emergency line because I didn't even know what else to do. How do you report someone politely removing a lock? The officer who showed up was calm. He examined the window, the frame, and the screws. "Any disputes?" he asked. "No." "Any recent contractors?" "No." He walked the yard, looked up at the window from outside. It wasn't impossible to reach. A crate, a ladder, even a trash can would do it. Back inside, he tapped the empty screw holes. "This wasn't forced," he said. "Whoever did this didn't want to break anything." I asked the question I didn't want to ask. "Why not break it?" He gave a small shrug. "Sometimes they just want you to know they can." That hit harder than I expected. After he left, I went into full project mode. Motion lights, cameras, extra locks. I reinforced everything that could be reinforced. I replaced the lock, added another lower down, installed a camera facing the side yard, another by the gate. On paper, we were safer than ever. But something had changed. The house used to feel quiet at night. Now it felt observant. Every small sound made me calculate. Was that wind? A branch? A footstep? I found myself walking through the house in the dark, checking corners, checking shadows that had never bothered me before. I kept replaying the detail that bothered me most. The screws, they weren't tossed on the floor, they weren't scattered, they were placed neatly on the counter. That wasn't panic, that wasn't rushed, that was someone taking their time inside my boundary. We lasted a couple more months. I told people we were moving for a better commute, better schools, closer to work. That's what made sense to outsiders. The truth was simpler. It wasn't the unlocked window that changed things. It was someone removing a lock I trusted, putting the screws down like a calling card, and proving they could come and go without breaking a single thing. And once someone shows you that your house is accessible, it stops feeling like yours. If you just walked around your house checking windows, I get it. Go ahead, smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare, and tell me which story messed with you the most. Now imagine this. No attic, no closet, no window. Just a small device quietly mapping your life. Click now to watch 4 really disturbing Apple AirTag horror stories. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't in your house. It's already with you. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.